Hello, y'all. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about the Punic Wars, which are a series of three wars that the Romans fought with the Carthaginians. And these are, I gotta say, probably some of my favorite parts of Roman history, and particularly the Second Punic War, just because there's just a lot of epicness going on. So Carthage was a city in North Africa. Originally would have been a colony of, I think, either Tyre or Sidon or both. Very, very strong naval force, also extremely wealthy. And they were very well known for their trade. They could go pretty much wherever on the Mediterranean, with their ships and everything. And the first of the Punic Wars lasted a long time, 264 BC to 241 BC. So well over 20 years. And a lot of it revolved around the island of Sicily, and some disputes there. Certain people asking the Romans for aid, so the Romans decide to get involved, and there are quite a few naval battles that ensue here. And at first, the Romans are not very strong with the ships and everything. They're much more of a land-based military. But eventually they develop a rather kind of a wonky device called a corvus, which enabled them to kind of attach themselves to enemy ships and then like board them and destroy the enemy that way. So it was a weird kind of like landing gear apparatus that allowed them to board other ships. And at first, this kind of weird device really helped them out a lot. But being a very wonky piece of equipment on the ship, it eventually was abandoned because there were some pretty bad storms on the Mediterranean and destroyed a huge portion of the Roman fleet, because they couldn't really control the boats with this extra piece of equipment on there. Now, one character, well, there are quite a few famous characters and everything that come out of these time periods, but one kind of famous guy from the First Punic War is a fellow named Marcus Attilius Regulus. Okay, so just Regulus, I guess, for short. And he was a two-time consul. And he had some military success, but he went down to Africa to kind of take the battle to the Carthaginians there, and he was actually defeated at the Battle of Tunis, 255 BC, by a fellow with a fantastic name, Xanthippus. Once again, if you're looking for good goldfish names, Xanthippus should be near the top of your list. Xanthippus was a mercenary, but anyway, he routed the Roman army. Regulus was captured. Now, the interesting thing with Regulus is he was actually sent on, I guess, parole back to the Roman Senate to negotiate peace terms with them from the Carthaginians. And Regulus went to the Senate, and he brought them these terms from the Carthaginians, but he strongly discouraged the Senate from accepting these terms. So he's like, hey, these are what the Carthaginians want you to do. Don't do it. Keep fighting. And Regulus, being a man of his word, returned back to the Carthaginians. So he could have just stayed there in Rome, but he returned as a captive, and it's a bit of a legend, but he was supposedly then basically tortured to death by being put in a box with like sharp nails on all sides, so he couldn't like lean any direction. So he met a very sad demise, but he's kind of a symbol of civic duty, civic honor, always doing what is best for your state, even if it means harm to yourself. So that was Regulus, and he's just a very honorable character. Eventually, the Romans are able to be victorious in this first Punic War. Although it kind of comes at the cost, both sides are just basically completely worn out with fighting, and neither of them have many resources left. So they agree to terms. Carthage sets out some terms, and then the Romans impose much harsher terms on them. And basically, Rome ends up getting the island of Sicily, and the Carthaginians have to vacate it. And then, on top of that, the Romans also take the island of Sardinia, which is to the west of Italy. After there was a bit of a revolt there, and it was a Carthaginian island, and the Romans then take that as well. And it was a really kind of a cruel move toward the Carthaginians, because it was definitely not in the terms of the treaty or anything like that. And then the Carthaginians had some further unrest because they weren't able to pay some of their mercenaries and all that sort of stuff. So it really ended up being a very difficult situation for the Carthaginians. But it's about ready to get worse in another 40 years. So anyway, the second Punic War, this is the most famous of the Punic Wars, and really it's a fascinating time period. Carthage is able to really bounce back pretty quickly. They get a colony out in Spain, and there's some really, really wealthy or sources of wealth there in silver, some really good silver mines in Spain, and they develop a colony over there. And hostilities are renewed. There was a town out there that the Romans took interest in, and then the Carthaginians took that same town. So their hostilities were renewed between Carthage and Rome. And this is kind of where we get the very famous incident with Hannibal. And Hannibal was the son of a fellow named Hamilcar, who was a general during the first Punic War. And Hannibal musters an army in Spain, and he marches it over and across the Alps into Italy, which was a huge, huge surprise to the Romans, because they saw the Alps as being a pretty good natural border. You've got this nice big mountain range in the north, so who would be crazy enough to cross over that? Well, Hannibal was crazy enough, and he made it. He did have people die along the way, but he made it with still a good sized force, and some war elephants as well. Um, and he was also able to get some of the local tribes there up north that were kind of at odds with the Romans. He was able to ally himself with them, and he inflicted some really, really devastating defeats on the Romans. Um, the first one of note is the Battle of Trebia, which is in 218, then one at Lake Trasimene, and then probably the most famous battle, and one of the deadliest for the Romans, was the Battle of Cannae. And the Romans outnumbered Hannibal over two to one, and Hannibal was just a master tactician, and was able to surround and then just utterly annihilate the Roman army. They ended up losing probably well over 40,000, maybe even 50,000 plus soldiers that day. Which, if you think about it, this is not just dropping a bomb on someone. This is battle at close combat. So it's a lot of death. And Hannibal just kind of met with victory, victory after victory, and some of Rome's allies started defecting from them. But part of the problem was Hannibal's forces were limited. He did not receive many reinforcements from the Carthaginians. And then the Romans started a kind of new tactic in their defense. A fellow named Fabius Maximus, he advocated the kind of the tactic of delaying and not confronting Hannibal, and kind of retaking some of the places that had defected or that Hannibal had conquered, because Hannibal, like I said before, did not have infinite resources, and he was not getting a lot of help from Carthage. So the Romans were little by little able to kind of shore up some of their losses, and finally they were able to get enough strength, and they also did have some victories out west in Spain with Scipio Africanus. He started doing very well out there, and Scipio Africanus took the battle away from he kind of redirected it, and was able to get Hannibal out of Italy. And how he did this was he mustered an army and actually marched on Carthage, took the battle to Africa. And Carthage was like, whoa, this was not what we bargained for. So they had to actually recall Hannibal, even though he was, devastating the Roman countryside. They had to recall him. And Scipio and Hannibal met at the Battle of Zama. And Scipio, with the help of some Numidian cavalry, that was a African tribe known for their horsemen, was able to defeat Hannibal at the Battle of Zama. And the Romans, after they won, imposed extremely harsh terms on the Carthaginians, and basically forced them to give up their other land holdings and so forth, and it basically was just Carthage now, and they didn't have an empire. So then there's a period of roughly a little over 50 years in which Rome continues to expand, and Rome acquires provinces or territories in Greece. And there's a series of wars they fight over there against the Macedonians and some other folk as well. and the Roman kind of empire, I guess you could say, expands in that late, or I guess it would be early 2nd century. And then the third and final Punic War, this one was basically over before it started, but in 149 to 146 was the third Punic War. Carthage, although they had gotten back a lot of their wealth, their military was almost entirely depleted, and Rome besieged Carthage and just utterly annihilated it, and they actually moved the city inland, which for a seafaring people is basically their doom. And Carthage ceased to be a major power after the Third Punic War. And you get a famous phrase here from a fellow named Cato. This is where you get the Carthago est delenda, that Carthage must be destroyed. That is where that comes from, is this third Punic War. Okay, so those are very, very brief and not, hopefully gives you some good information, hopefully, but obviously not in depth by any means, but a little brief snippet of some of the goings on of the Punic Wars. Again, this is a very interesting time period, at least in my opinion, so I encourage you to look it up more, look up some details, because what I gave you was very minimal. But let me know if you have any questions. I love you guys, and talk to you later.